So I just gave this speech for the NAACP Albany Corvallis branch 2021 Juneteenth celebration. We did it over Zoom because of the ongoing COVID pandemic and forgot to record it. So I'm going to give it once again right afterwards so that we can upload this to YouTube. I want to thank Terrence for helping organize this event and branch president Jason Dorsett. Also want to thank Corvallis Mayor Biff Treber, who was in attendance today, as well as Judge Stet Waters, and thank everybody who is here today. I look over the River Jordan, and what do I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. If you get there before I do, coming for to carry me home. Tell all my friends I'm coming too, coming for to carry me home. I'm sometimes up, I'm sometimes down, coming for to carry me home. But still my soul feels heavenly bound, coming for to carry me home. These are the words from one of the many Negro spirituals sung by enslaved Africans since the first day their shackled feet touched the earth of newly seized indigenous land in this place we call America. These black hands would slowly build a nation under the enforcement of cowhides and to the tunes of songs that trace their roots back to the continent that their children would never know. As a black man whose father is directly from the continent of Africa, the tribe of the Zandi tribe of the lush green hills of Maridi, South Sudan, I stand with my fellow black brothers and sisters here in the United States, some of which have no history of their tribe or their land in which they came from, as we prepare to celebrate and recognize the 156th anniversary of Juneteenth. The proclamation that saw the slow end of Negro spirituals. A day remembered as the Black 4th of July, or the day that Black people were set free, of which it is neither. A day as whitewashed as the legacy of Martin Luther King. This is not the Juneteenth I remember as a child, the one celebrated at barbecues at the parks and basketball games, relegated solely to the Black community. Juneteenth has now been invited to take its place where all Black things are invited when their social capital is of enough value to white America that it is pulled from the shadows of the Black community into the blinding limelight of white America. From Harriet Tubman to Rosa Parks, from Langston Hughes to the Tulsa Race Massacre, from jazz to hip hop, if there is any value in Black culture, political, economic, or otherwise, it is commodified, whitewashed, and uplifted by white America. This is where we find ourselves today with Juneteenth. The murder of George Floyd has led to an embrace of Juneteenth like no other. It's the scramble of Juneteenth as I see it. Politicians, corporations, city and state governments, your friendly local neighborhood white folks are all scrambling to get their hands on Juneteenth. Juneteenth has become the latest cash grab in a country that would rather symbolically acknowledge the legacy of racism rather than do the institutional work to dismantle the system that perpetuates it. But before we dive into that, let us explore the roots of Juneteenth. To understand Juneteenth, you must first throw away the first tenet of fabulized American history, which is morality. The United States has never acted in a moral capacity in regard to racial issues. Never. There has been nothing moral about the motivations behind the Emancipation Proclamation. In fact, there can be nothing moral in the decision to free a portion of enslaved people after 246 years of bondage. Let us look at the Emancipation Proclamation. Contrary to popular thought, it did not free all slaves. It just freed slaves in southern states. And to be clear, this was a purely economic motivation, as slave labor was the backbone of the southern economy, which had just recently seceded from the Union. If you leave it to American history, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves because that was what the Civil War was all about. In reality, it was an economic motivation that in turn made slavery a political pawn within the Civil War. I maintain that the United States has never been driven by moral or ethical motivations when acting in the perceived interest of Black Americans. The emancipation attempted and succeeded in breaking the backbone of the Southern economy and brought desperately needed Black troops into the Union Army. In segregated ranks, of course. If our country is to move forward, we must accept a full version of our history. And painting our country as a purely moral force hinders that goal. The Emancipation Proclamation was declared on January 1st, 1863. General Robert E. Lee surrendered on April 9th, 1865, and President Lincoln was assassinated 6 days later on April 15th. 2 months after that, on June 19th, 1865, over 250 enslaved Africans were finally told of their freedom in Texas 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was first declared. Let us reckon with our history. Let us understand our history and its implications. The version of American history with Lincoln as this great emancipator who freed enslaved Black people with moral courage because slavery was an evil institution does nothing more than perpetuate a false narrative that reinforces white supremacy. But for the sake of white supremacy, President Lincoln was granted his wish, which in his words were, and I quote, "If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." He is remembered for statements like these rather than for his other comments on Black people, such as this one in his 1858 U.S. Senate debate against Stephen Douglas, and he stated, and I quote, "I will say that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about any way the social and political equality of the white and Black races, that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say, in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between white and Black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races of living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be a position of superior and inferior. And I, as much as any other man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. We can either run from our history or embrace it. Do not attempt to celebrate or recognize Juneteenth if you are going to do so with ignorance towards its context and history. Let us dispel of another myth while we are at it, that slavery was abolished. Slavery was said to finally be abolished with the passing of the 13th Amendment. This is both wishful thinking and yet another glossy version of American history. Slavery is still very much alive today. Indeed, the 13th Amendment reads, "Neither slavery nor voluntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall be duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction." Today, Black people make up 12% of the U.S. population, yet 33% of the incarcerated population, while white people make up 63% of our population and only 30% of the incarcerated population. Slavery wasn't abolished. It was legalized and repackaged under the 13th Amendment. Mass incarceration is the latest iteration of Black control after Jim Crow. If you are going to celebrate Juneteenth, celebrate it with proper racial context, not out of a willed ignorance. You must understand these two facts, that it wasn't a moral action and that slavery still exists under mass incarceration. So where do we go from here? We must decide if we will settle for performative allyship or move towards Black liberation. What performative motivations Lincoln had for the Emancipation Proclamation, President Kennedy repeated over 100 years later during the Civil Rights Movement and his slow embrace of the movement and its leaders as a political necessity at the height of the Cold War is the same motivations that lead to the sudden embrace of Juneteenth today that we didn't see even a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. The white middle class was not built through symbolic holidays, community barbecues, or implicit bias trainings. It was built through massive investments from the federal government that created wealth building opportunities for millions of poor whites that ushered them into the middle class. Examples of this include the New Deal, the Homestead Act, and the World War II GI Bill, and even urban renewal, which I may add, all of these investments explicitly excluded Black individuals. But these types of initiatives are the exact type that will be needed if we are to raise up the Black community. So what exactly does the Black community need? First of all, we need true education. The average Black student attends 12 years of public education and has maybe one teacher, as it was in my case, who is actually Black like them and learns nothing about their Black history besides Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King. They do not learn anything relevant to their day-to-day lives, such as paying taxes, getting a home mortgage, or how to raise a family. Because school is neither culturally relevant nor intrinsically reflects their worth, Black students too often disengage from school, not seeing it as a place for them, and who can blame them? This leads to high school dropout rates, involvement in crime and gangs, and an overall underachievement of their full potential. We must inspire Black students to engage in school and to show them that anything is possible the way we do with white students. Number 2 is jobs. Black people need real jobs. You cannot raise a family on an entry-level minimum wage job with no benefits. The Black community needs access to real jobs and training programs to attain and maintain those positions. We must help Black youth in middle and high school attain internships at an early age so they can start to learn what it means to work in a professional environment. When Black people have good jobs, they will be able to afford homes, to shop and buy in their neighborhoods, and provide for their children with enrichment activities that keep them engaged and have more time to spend with their families. Too often, Black parents are gone working multiple jobs just to make ends meet without a dime extra. We need to help Black families earn jobs that they can not only get by, but also to grow. Finally, we need housing. Not housing projects, not apartments, but homes that we own. Houses that we can raise families in, that allow us to build wealth and to pass it down to our children. Houses that are near schools, schools that fully educate our children, that they can walk home from after school to a parent who is oftentimes because they work at a 9-to-5 job. We know that home ownership is one of the best ways to build wealth, yet generation after generation, Black homes have been the cost of urban renewal, infrastructure projects, and gentrification. When you think of allyship, what comes to mind? I think about white people showing up at marches, putting up pictures and hashtags on social media, attending trainings. I do not doubt the sincerity of these individuals, but I also know it won't change the long-term conditions of Black people in our country. In my eyes, true allyship is about dismantling the white supremacy system that your ancestors built. Dismantling white supremacy means white-dominated institutions, businesses, and organizations using their resources and influence to support Black people and Black-led organizations fighting for Black liberation. Imagine the impact of white-dominated parent-teacher associations could make if they demanded their schools raise the reading scores for Black students without relying solely on the necessity of Black parents and Black organizations to fight for racial and education equity. Legal firms could dedicate a week of time each year to provide their services pro bono to communities that otherwise couldn't afford their services. I know we have litigators on the call today. Real estate and property owners could set aside certain numbers of office spaces, buildings, and land to house Black organizations and small businesses rent-free to help them gain a foothold in their respective industries. Until white people are willing to share the resources their white privilege afforded them, then we will continue a cycle of small acts of charity that are more performative rather than the true reciprocity which will change the current conditions of Black people. The federal government must lead the way in these actions. Ultimately, they bear responsibility for ensuring that all of our citizens have an opportunity to succeed and provide the resources for them to do so. Not only has the federal government been negligent insofar as Black citizens are concerned, but it has actively been engaged in the underinvestment of Black communities. It is high time that the pendulum swing in the other direction and the federal government make massive investments into the Black community, similar to the ones I was speaking about earlier. Locally here in Portland, I've put together a plan called the Rose City Investment Plan, which talks about a number of community investments to help support the Black community that I will read through a few of them right now. The first is hiring 100 Black school teachers, 100 Black firefighters, and 100 Black police officers over a 10-year period with 10 employees hired each year per respective cohort. That would be over 300 public service jobs that would provide middle-class wages specifically set aside for Black individuals that would not only create more wealth, but would directly impact and improve the Black community today. Free tuition for Black students in state public universities, fully paid tuition, books, board, along with automatic admission into these universities. And when I say automatic admission, I mean 100%. How many white students do we know that got into universities that didn't earn their way in, that got in solely on the fact that they were white? If we are going to reverse the trends, we need to break down all barriers. As a student who once graduated with a 2.3 GPA, I know what it is like to struggle in school, yet still have potential. We have to invest in our youth and create schools that uplift them. Number 3 is free public transportation on buses and light rails. Transportation is a basic utility. It should be a basic fundamental right. I used to teach high school, and one of the number one reasons students said they couldn't get to school was because of transportation. Let's eliminate those barriers. Think about the families that can't get across town to see a loved one who's in the hospital, or even to make it to work, or to get to a kid's soccer or basketball game, simply because they can't ride the bus because they can't find the $2.50 to get on. Or ride the Max Rail with fear that they're going to get stopped for a ticket that they didn't purchase simply because they don't make enough money because all their money went to rent. Some of the other initiatives in this plan are a jobs pipeline, a home ownership program, and an alternative sentencing model, because we know locking up young individuals does not change their condition and in fact further sets them back. Finally, we need mental health and trauma support for Black community members who are grieving. Our communities have went through decades and centuries of trauma, and it will take culturally relevant social workers and trauma-informed experts to help our families and our communities heal. Just those who say, how can we pay for all of these things? I say, find the money. When we look to finance police budgets, when we look to finance expeditions for military overseas, there's never a need to find the money. We always somehow have it. But as soon as we talk about investments into Black communities or into schools, suddenly there's no management or funds available for those activities. But I will say this. It is easier and more cost effective if you are truly concerned about financial and fiscal responsibility to invest on the front end rather than to fund social services nets because individuals cannot pay their rent or to pay military budgets and police budgets of huge costs when you could just invest on people on the front end. Do you know that it costs less to send a kid to school, send a kid to college than it is to send someone to jail for a year? And think about the return on your investment when a student returns from school versus when they return from incarceration and what they're able to do with that investment. So if we are truly concerned about the financial aspects, let's invest now rather than to repair the system later on down the road. Frederick Douglass once asked, "What to a slave is the 4th of July?" He said, and I quote, "I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within this pale of this day, of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you and not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I mourn." Today, I have a question to ask. What to the 21st century Black American is Juneteenth? How can we celebrate our freedom of our ancestors today when Black people make up 12% of the US population, but 33% of the incarcerated population? How can we celebrate our freedom today when the police officers who murdered Breonna Taylor while she was sleeping are still free? How can we celebrate freedom today when the wealth gap between Black and white individuals is on average a difference of $800,000 in 2019? How can we celebrate the freedom of our country when Black students across our country continue to go to schools named after slave owners? Imagine that. Imagine attending a school named after the slave owners that owned your ancestors. That is a shame. This is what I think about when I think about Juneteenth. When I read the headlines that Oregon is making Juneteenth a state holiday, I need more than symbolic gestures. I can't raise my family on a holiday. My kids, my future children will need more than a school named after black person to get their full education. I open my speech with the words of a Negro spiritual, and I will close from words from our modern day Negro spirituals, that great and almighty art form we call hip hop. This is a quote from one of my favorite rappers, Nas, in his song, Black Zombies. He says, "What do we own? Not enough land, not enough homes, not enough banks to give my brother a loan. What do we own? The skin on our back. We rent. We ask for reparations, then they hit us with tax and insurance if we live to be old. But what about now?" These are the words that I leave you with today as I close out. What about now? What are we going to do today for Black people in this country? If you are in a position of power, what about now? If you are a white person, what about now? If you are a Black father that is maybe distant from your children, what about now? If we want to truly celebrate the 4th of July or live up to the ideals in our country, what about now? If you are an elected official, what about now? Juneteenth is less than 19 days away, and I leave you with these words. What about now? Thank you.